first conversation at the table. I'm joined by Nancy Fowler with the St. Louis Beacon, Moisey Shopper, a child psychiatrist.
And psychoanalyst.
And psychoanalyst, thank you very much. And Norm White with St. Louis University, a criminologist with St. Louis University. We have you here because you were all kind of interconnected in something Nancy worked on this week. Nancy, you wrote an article. You know, I think sometimes after a tragedy is almost overused this past week, but after a tragedy like this, we kind of grasp for a narrative, and we want to say, oh, well, there was a mental health issue involved, and all of a sudden we can kind of relax a little bit, maybe somehow that makes sense in our minds. But the title of your article was The Difficult Relationship Between Mental Health and Violence. What did you find in working for the Beacon on this article? What makes that relationship so difficult?
Well, the shooter, alleged shooter in the Connecticut tragedy, was not known to have any particular diagnosis, but yet these kinds of horrific occurrences always, of course, have a mental health component and raise that issue. So we thought it was important to take a look at that, and to start, we looked at. There are some dangers of actually even associating these two issues, violence and mental health, because
do the two overlap often? I mean, there are a lot of people struggling, dealing with mental health issues that are not violent, and a lot of violence that has nothing to do with mental health.
That's exactly right. I mean, from what I'm told by people that work in the mental health field, and the two of you, that actually it's a very small percentage of violence that is committed by people with mental health issues.
Is that a dangerous area that when we start grasping for that narrative right there? Is the overlap pretty small?
I think we're looking for something to make us comfortable, to try and make sense of the senseless. In this case, it was such a struggle to deal with the gravity of this incident that it's hard to say anything other than he had to be crazy. And that's where we began our conversation.
And I'm referencing back to the article Nancy wrote. I mean, is mental health like physical health? I mean, should we be treating things early and preventing? If I get on the treadmill now, I may not have a heart attack later in life. Are there those kind of comparisons?
I think you're talking about treating. I would prefer to talk about prevention. In other words, if you have a stable relationship in your family with a parent, single parent or double parent or extended family, even better. But that is basic to mental health, is to have this kind of stable, unwavering, loving relationship with a parent. And many kids don't have that. They have it disrupted by one thing or another, and as a result, their mental health is endangered.
Why don't people seek help for themselves, or, as you're talking, for their children?
We don't encourage people to talk about mental health.
We don't encourage?
No, we run away from the issue of mental health. The picture, and this is, again, in the conversation I had with Nancy, when we think about violence and mental health, we think of the joke or the riddle, or we think about people that are just so beyond the pale. There are a lot of people who are experiencing mental health issues or problems on a daily basis in urban America. My focus is on communities and crime. And the kinds of experiences, the stresses that kids deal with on a daily basis would require at some point that we need to pay attention to their mental health, but we don't have resources. There's not enough insurance. There's not enough access to the resources in the community. It becomes a challenge.
And do you see the same with the stigma? When you're reporting or in your work, is there the stigma that is preventing treatment?
It used to be quite great that if you were seeing a shrink, you were very sick, and you kept it to yourself and you didn't talk about it. In the past 20, 30 years, that has changed. People talk about their analysts, their treatment, what they're doing for their mental health, and a whole batch of alternative therapies in mental health have developed, and some of them are nonsense and some of them are very good. But there's a lot more openness than there used to be, and especially among the newer generation. They don't see it with as much stigmata as their parents do. But it's still not a very popular thing. Let's put it that way. It's not like getting your shots for the flu.
Do you see? No, go ahead. I'm
And I
sorry.
think that there's a difference in terms of who's having that conversation. That it's not something that's comfortable to talk about in poor communities, poor urban communities. That, you know, I'm talking about my analyst, and I'm dealing with my analyst, and, you know, I have this diagnosis. That's not common. In fact, it's less likely that they'll seek out that help. I was working with the health department last summer, and they had done some focus groups with kids, and they asked them, where would you go to get the resources you need if you had a health problem, a mental health kind of issue, or needed counseling? And those kids said that they would go to the juvenile detention center or jail. That's not the place you get resources for a health problem. In order to get in there, you have to self-nominate by getting arrested. So now you're criminal as opposed to being unhealthy in terms of your psychological well-being. Those are issues that we have to take on.
What can
The
we
other-
do in some of these communities?
Can I add something?
I'm sorry?
Those kids who have to grow up unattended by good parenting, often develop a sense of reliance on themselves and then reliance on their age mates, called gangs. And for them to go and seek help by anyone or with anyone goes counter to the sense of, I can make it on my own, I have the resources. And it's an affront to their sense of competence to be asking for, quote, mental health help.
So what
And
can
many
be done?
people avoid
and
it.
What can be done in these communities and to ease that stigma and to make it a more acceptable, even, you know, a good thing to
I
seek
think
help?
rather than easing stigmata, you ought to provide better resources for families, which means communities, schools, recreational programs, art and music programs. Nowadays, when a school is in trouble, what do they cut? They cut the music, and they cut the art, and they give more money to the football coach.
And we said in the beginning, we're talking about all children. You know, we are hyper focused when we have a mass shooting, but and again, I want to be careful here. I'm not trying to do what we talked about. We shouldn't there and make some sort of loose connection between
Right.
mental health and violence. But there are problems that are claiming the lives of children all the time. Is there something that we're missing by only focusing our attention when something massive and dramatic like this happens?
I think that we do a disservice, because what the conversation has been about in terms of mental health and violence in the last week has been about, you know, the more severe mental illness. And if that's what it takes to get attention, then we don't deal with kind of the root causes and the progression to that unhealthy state. When I was right after we had done this interview the other day, I had a student come into my office, and we were going to talk about a project we're working on, and she was crying, and I asked her what was going on, and her response was that a friend of her sister's had just committed suicide. This is 4 days before Christmas, maybe it's 5 days. That young woman had to have been going through some psychological distress that you don't see in the conversations we're having right now. And those are the kids we have to help. We have to help young people who just don't see solutions to very challenging worlds that they live in.
If you know of someone, if you're in a position to be with kids and you see someone who's very troubled, what steps should you take first? I mean, where should you send them for help?
Well, you should talk with their parents first. You can't send a kid just because you say so.
Right.
You need parental cooperation. They need to have an understanding as to what the problem is as you see it and what significance you attach to that problem. and then what resources are available to them in their community, or what resources are available, period. And sometimes, the resources are not very good.
Thank you all.